Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Is China plotting a war against India? This is not a rhetorical question. Ever since the Chinese dragon's creeping expansionism was blunted first at Doklam in 2017 and then again in the Galwan Valley in 2020, the picture that is clearly emerging is of a petulant dragon that is preparing for war. As any military strategist will tell you, before a war is fought, the logistics for combat are laid out. The infrastructure that China is building in the Tibet and the Xinjiang province points at only one thing. This is not a defensive preparation. This is preparation for a military offensive. And this may not be limited to a ground misadventure this time round. What China appears to be planning for in the near imminent future is an air battle over the icy mountains of the Himalayas. China is preparing for war because nothing else explains the furious pace of military and dual installations that have sprung up in Tibet and Xinjiang. Open source intelligence experts have pointed out that the new runways, ammunition storage facilities and other auxiliary infrastructure that has sprung up in just the last 5 years to increase sortie rates and to reduce congestion. These satellite images from Planet Labs will give you a closer glimpse of what China's air bases along India's border look like at the present moment. This is the Lhasa Air Base, the Hotan Air Base and the Engari Gunsa Air Base. Why does China need to boost its offensive air power here along the border with India? The Hotan Air Base is where China has stationed its J-11 and J-20 attack fighter jets, its electronic warfare aircraft and airborne and early warning and control aircraft and drones. The Lhasa Air Base is where China houses its Z-20 attack helicopters. So what is China plotting? In 1962, India and China had fought a war, a ground assault in which China tried to make an incursion into India before withdrawing back. What is interesting to note is that air power was not used in 1962. For decades since the 1962 war, the India-China border had remained largely quiet. But things have changed since 2017, when the Chinese bid for a land grab at Doklam at the tri-junction between India, Bhutan and China was thwarted by New Delhi as part of Operation Juniper. Some very dramatic images of the Indian and the Chinese soldiers exchanging blows with each other went viral. A border which had remained quiet for decades had begun to stir with tension. In May 2020, the Indian and the Chinese troops clashed at the Galwan Valley. Reason? This was yet another attempt at trying to alter the status quo at the line of actual control. 20 Indian soldiers were killed in mortal hand-to-hand combat. The Chinese soldiers used steel rods wrapped with barbed wire to inflict maximum damage. And though China did not immediately release its casualty count, it later emerged that at least about 35 to 45 Chinese soldiers had ended up losing their lives at Galwan. Another attempt of China's age-old practice of salami slicing had been challenged and thwarted. On the 7th of September 2020, for the first time in over 45 years, shots were fired along the line of actual control. And since then, despite the fact that there have been several rounds of Corps Commander level talks to resolve the border standoff, China has tried a land grab at every possible opportunity, only to be beaten back furiously, as this video from September 2021 demonstrates. So that brings us back to our earlier question. Why is China boosting its air offensive capabilities along India's border? Fact is, repeated attempts by the Chinese soldiers on the ground to alter the status quo have ended in embarrassing failures. India of 2023 is not the India of 1962. The Chinese ground forces have proven ineffectual in making their Indian counterparts budge. So China, it appears, is now itching for an air war over the icy peaks of the Himalayas. What started as an invasion of Ukraine is fast turning into a battle to keep the home turf safe. The nature of the Ukraine war has undergone some pretty dramatic changes. As part of its strategy to fight back, Ukraine is doing the one thing that the West had been very squeamish about. Instead of conquering more Ukrainian territory, the Russian forces at this moment are busy guarding the Moscow skies. There have been a spate of cross-border ground and drone attacks deep inside the Russian territory. Ukraine appears to be implementing the old adage that the best defense is a good offense. So how successful has Kiev been in pushing back at the Russian forces? And how is Russia planning to blunt the Ukrainian counteroffensive this spring? Our next report gets you the details. The port city of Berdyansk is nowhere near the front lines. But on the 2nd of June, it was rocked by an explosion. This drone footage, released by the Freedom of Russia Legion, an anti-Kremlin group supported by Ukraine, shows sights from inside the Russian territory of Belgorod, with the claim that Russia's military equipment is being destroyed. On the 31st of May, at 3 a.m. in the early hours of the morning, a Russian oil refinery in the Krasnodar region lit up with a massive blaze. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone had been used to spark the inferno. Fighters were being pumped into Russia with overt and covert support from Ukraine for the purpose of cross-border raids, insist that this is a tactic that will be repeatedly employed in the coming days.
We, the Freedom of Russia Legion, are now near the border of our motherland. Very soon, we will be advancing again into Russian territory to bring freedom, peace and tranquility. Kravoron, which is a Russian town close to border with Ukraine, is only the beginning. Because of the cowardice of Putin's military jackals, we have received many trophies. Thanks to this, we will be able to arm more of our comrade in arms. We are going to liberate the whole of Russia, from Belgorod to Vladivostok, so that the white, blue, white flag of freedom will be hoisted in Moscow.
But it hasn't just been the military targets and infrastructure, but even the posh civilian buildings in the upscale neighborhoods of Moscow that have come under attack. Russian media, which has remained tight-lipped about the reverses it has suffered in the battlefield, began to beam images of the drone strikes in Moscow. Despite a string of daring attacks that Ukraine has managed to execute inside the Russian territory, it is important to highlight that there is simply no equivalence to the scale of the devastation that Russia is even now able to unleash on Ukraine at will. Moscow has continued with its relentless missile and drone strikes on Ukraine. Wave after wave of air attacks have rained down on the Ukrainian capital. Despite the best anti-air defense systems from the West, Moscow still dominates the skies over Kiev. Stepping out onto the streets of the Ukrainian capital is fraught with danger. Every time the sirens blare, people rush to the subway stations to take refuge. For children, locating the nearest bomb shelter and taking refuge has now become a part of their school curriculum. On the battlefields, Russia is now pumping in over 7,000 Chechen fighters to bolster its defenses against the Ukrainian counteroffensive. It has lined up anti-tank Dragon's Teeth to slow down the Ukrainian tanks. All along the territory that Russia now controls, Moscow has installed fortifications to repel the fire from the Western weapons. Volodymyr Zelensky is hopping through the European capitals to get more weapons, to get the coveted membership into the elite club of the NATO military alliance. But on the battlefield, it is the common soldiers who are trudging through the slush and dirt, battling for their lives and trying to evade death. Tensions are running high in northern Kosovo, as in the last fortnight, the ethnic Serbs have gone on a rampage and clashed with the Kosovan police. They were protesting against what they described as the installation of ethnic Albanian mayors who were elected in last month's local elections. The very elections that were boycotted by the majority ethnic Serbs. The situation remains tense as 30 NATO peacekeepers were injured in these clashes. So why is the Balkans again simmering with violence.
Trouble seems to be brewing in the Balkans. Kosovo is a Balkan nation inhabited by 1.8 million people, majority of whom are ethnic Albanians. Around 6% of the Kosovo population, or an estimated 120,000 ethnic Serbs, have largely remained loyal to Belgrade, especially in the north, where they are in majority. Kosovo unilaterally declared independence from Serbia in 2008. Washington and most European countries have recognized Kosovo as an independent state, but Belgrade and its allies, Russia and China, have still not recognized the move. Snap elections were conducted on the 23rd of April in the 4 northern districts of Leposavic, Zubin Potok, Mitrovica and Svekan. These elections were widely boycotted by the 50,000 Serbs living in these municipalities. Voter turnout was an abysmal 3.7%, and Serbs argued that the mayors elected were not their representatives. On the 26th of May, tensions boiled over. Ethnic Serbian protesters clashed with Kosovo police over the installation of these ethnic Albanian mayors. They prevented these newly elected mayors from entering their offices. Police fired tear gas to disperse these protesters. A police car was also set ablaze. Situation took a turn for the worse a couple of days later, when ethnic Serbs clashed with troops from the NATO KFOR peacekeeping force. These clashes in the municipality of Svekan, 45 kilometers north of the capital, Pristina, took place as the Serbs tried to take over the offices of the municipality. Soldiers used shields and batons in a bid to protect the Kosovar Special Police Forces officers. In a violent response, the assembled Serbs hurled rocks, bottles and Molotov cocktails at the soldiers. A total of 30 peacekeepers, 11 Italians and 19 Hungarians were wounded in the clashes, some of them fractured and burned by improvised explosive devices. These unprovoked attacks of a violent and dangerous crowd was strongly condemned by NATO.
We strongly condemn the unprovoked attacks against KFOR troops in northern Kosovo, which led to 30 peacekeepers being wounded. Such attacks are unacceptable and must stop. KFOR, the NATO forces, will take all necessary actions to maintain a safe and secure environment for all citizens in Kosovo. And we will continue to act impartially in line with our United Nations mandate.
Consequently, 700 more troops from the Operational Reserve Force for Western Balkans were dispatched. Belgrade, on its part, placed its army on high alert and ordered its forces toward the frontier with Kosovo. A move frequently used in recent years. Serbs demanded the withdrawal of Kosovo Special Police Forces as well as the ethnic Albanian mayors.
I would like to repeat what we are calling for. The withdrawal of Kosovar Special Police Forces from municipalities in northern Kosovo, and that fake mayors don't come into the church buildings in northern Kosovo.
The situation remains tense and security has been stepped up around the town hall in northern Kosovo. Hundreds of ethnic Serbs have been gathering daily at the site of the clashes, though their number has progressively dwindled. The Serbia-Kosovo conflict traces its roots to the 1998 uprising of separatist ethnic Albanians in Kosovo against Serbia's rule. Serbia then had responded with a brutal crackdown in which 13,000 people, mostly ethnic Albanians, died. NATO's military intervention in 1999 eventually forced Serbia to pull out of the country. The local election boycott in April, the cause of the current crisis, was orchestrated by Serbia. A grim reminder that Belgrade still hasn't adjusted to the reality of Kosovo as an independent, democratic republic.
Taliban fighters and the Iranian border guards exchanged heavy gunfire on the 27th of May. The deadly clashes on the Islamic Republic's border with Afghanistan have sharply escalated the tensions. At least about 2 Iranian guards and a Taliban fighter were killed, raising fears of a new conflict between the neighbors amidst a dispute over water rights. Both sides have accused each other of provoking the shooting, though they later issued measured statements in an effort to de-escalate from the tense situation. But the question is this: why is the Taliban, that is seeking international recognition, getting into a serious conflict with its neighbor?
Tensions escalated between the Taliban-ruled Afghanistan and the Islamic Republic of Iran this past week. Deadly clashes were reported past Saturday at the border post between the Afghan province of Nimroz and Iran's Sistan-Baluchistan province. It still remains unknown who initiated these shootings, in which troops from both sides were killed and wounded. Following the border violence, Tehran closed the Melag-Saranj border post, which is an important border crossing and a major trade route, until further notice. Iranian president, while on a visit to the drought-affected southeastern Iran on the 18th of May, had issued a warning to Afghanistan to respect Iran's water rights.
I warn the rulers of Afghanistan to immediately give the people of Sistan-Baluchistan their water rights. Take my words seriously so that you won't complain later and say you were not told or thought that you could get over this issue with diplomatic and political negotiations or the passage of time. The passage of time will not solve this issue.
The major bone of contention is the sharing of Helmand River waters, over which the two sides have wrangled for decades. Despite there being a treaty in place since 1973, the Helmand River flows from the mountains of the central Afghan province bearing the same name, for more than 1,000 kilometers into Lake Hamoon, which bestrides the Afghanistan-Iran border. Once one of the world's largest wetlands, Lake Hamoon straddles 4,000 square kilometers between Iran and Afghanistan. Fed by the Helmand River, it has since dried up owing to drought and the impact of Afghan dams and water controls. With construction work resuming on the Baksh Abad Dam in May, the Taliban hope to generate 27 megawatts of electricity and address the major issue of irrigation in the frequently drought-hit country.
This is our responsibility, and we should have tried from the beginning to complete the construction of this dam so that the water which we wasted this year would not have been wasted. Afghanistan is not a small country. As the Minister of Energy and Water mentioned, our roads are broken, our other infrastructure is in the same condition, dams as well. There is not a single thing that doesn't need reconstruction.
Iran itself has been plagued by droughts for close to 3 decades, with an estimated 97% of the country now staring at some level of drought. As per the Helmand Water Treaty, Afghanistan is obliged to annually share 850 million cubic meters of water from Helmand with Iran, though both countries have called for a resolution of such issues through diplomatic channels. Given the increasing water scarcity and demand, water dispute between diplomatically isolated Kabul and increasingly belligerent Tehran will likely remain a contentious issue.
Indigenous protesters faced off with the Brazilian police on the 30th of May. One of the busiest highways leading into Sao Paulo was blocked with flaming barricades. In an attempt to try and clear the road, the police resorted to firing tear gas at the protesters. The indigenous protesters responded by firing arrows. The protest is in fact against a proposed bill that seeks to limit the indigenous people's ability to win protected status for their ancestral lands. Our next report gets you the details.
Hundreds of Guarani indigenous people shut down one of the busiest roadways leading into Brazil's most populous city, Sao Paulo, on Tuesday morning. Indigenous members, clad in feathered headdresses with their bodies and faces painted black, clashed with Brazilian police trying to clear the highway. Using their rudimentary bows and arrows, they confronted police, who shot tear gas into the crowd of demonstrators.
We are in a national protest with the original people of this territory. Today, in the name of Brazil, we are fighting for life. Here are my people, the Guarani people, fighting, saying no to the law of death, saying no to the law of destruction, saying no to the time frame.
Indigenous groups from across the country have planned a week of protests outside the Congress in the capital, Brasilia. By midday on Tuesday, though, the highway was cleared and reopened. But backups persisted and progress was slow for thousands of motorists affected by the blockade.
They threw a lot of arrows at the police, and we even picked up some arrows here on the road. Everything has been resolved for now, and the highway is free again.
The protests were triggered by the Congress' decision to vote on a legislation, Bill 490, that stipulates an indigenous group could only have their lands recognized if they were occupying the land before 1988, the year Brazil's constitution came into effect. Activists and indigenous leaders consider the bill controversial, because many indigenous people had already been expelled from their lands before this cutoff date. The new bill will impact hundreds of territories under evaluation, besides exacerbating the problem of illegal logging and mining. Presently, some 300 different ethnic groups inhabit 730 territories that they consider ancestral lands, mainly in the Amazon forests. President Lula da Silva, in a positive first step last month, fulfilled his election promise by recognizing 6 indigenous territories. The road ahead, though, is a long and arduous one, considering indigenous leaders want him to protect some 300 more territories. Will President Lula stand tall and deliver and not buckle under the pressure from the powerful agricultural lobby?
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. And if you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, you can do so by reaching out to me on the Twitter handle that you see on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.